The smell hit him first. Not the usual smell of metal and recycled air that filled every corner of Station Meridian. This was something else. Warm, faintly sweet, like something alive was nearby, something that did not belong in a cargo bay full of dead equipment and filed-off crates. Orrin Hale pulled up his work scanner and walked in. Cargo Bay 7 had been flagged for a routine check. Pressure sensor on grid 4 was giving false readings. Simple job. He had done it 100 times. He expected dust, maybe a loose coupling, maybe a pipe joint that had shifted half a millimeter to the left. He did not expect to find every other maintenance worker's route avoidance notice stacked in the digital log like a wall. 12 separate crew members had rerouted away from Cargo Bay 7 in the last 2 days. No reason given. Just rerouted. Orrin had shrugged at his screen that morning and accepted the ticket anyway. He was not the kind of man who asked too many questions. He fixed things. That was the job. He moved through the rows of crates, scanner humming. The pressure sensor was near the far wall, behind a stack of decommissioned supply containers that had been sitting there since before he transferred to the station. He squeezed through the gap between 2 crates, held his scanner up, and stopped. There was a dead Vrethali on the floor. He had seen Vrethali before. Twice, at formal meetings he had attended in the background while senior staff did the actual talking. They were large creatures, scaled, bioluminescent. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things sometimes were. This one was curled on its side, eyes closed, already tagged with a yellow disposal notice. Died in transit, most likely. He had heard something about a Vrethali transport passing through 3 days ago. He stood still for a moment out of respect. Then he noticed the crate beside the dead Vrethali was not quite closed. It was moving. Very slightly. Shaking really. Like something small inside was trembling. Orrin put his scanner away. He crossed to the crate slowly, not making noise, and lifted the loose lid. Inside, pressed into the far corner, was the smallest living creature he had ever seen on a space station. It was about the size of a large cat. Maybe smaller. Gold scales shading into green at the edges, still soft looking the way a young animal's skin is soft before it hardens with age. For small limbs folded tight against its body. 2 wings, barely more than thin membranes, pulled in so tightly they had almost disappeared against its back. The eyes were closed. The chest was moving. Fast, too fast, the way a frightened animal breathes when it is trying not to be found. It was a Vrethali hatchling. Orrin stood there for about 4 seconds. Then he took off his work jacket, which was a thick station-issue thing that smelled like sealant and rust, and he picked the hatchling up carefully in both hands and wrapped it. It made a sound like a creak. Very small. Its eyes opened. They were gold, enormous for its face, and they looked at him with an expression that was so clearly afraid and so clearly tired that it made something in his chest pull tight in a way he had not expected. "Hey," he said quietly. "It's all right." He did not know if that was true. He said it anyway. He sat down on the floor of the cargo bay with his back against the crate, the hatchling wrapped in his jacket and held against his chest, and he tapped his comm open with one hand. "Bay 7 to medical. I've got a situation." Medical Bay answered in about 30 seconds. He described what he had found. There was a pause, then a longer pause. Then a voice that was trying very hard to stay professional explained to him that the creature he was describing was a Vrethali hatchling, and that no species aboard Station Meridian had the cultural or legal authority to handle it without clan sanction, and that the correct procedure was to secure the area and file a diplomatic inquiry that would be forwarded to the relevant authorities. Orrin listened to all of this. Then he looked down at the hatchling in his jacket. It had stopped shaking. Its eyes were still on him. Its breathing had slowed to something that was almost normal. It had pressed its small nose very gently against the inside of his wrist, right at the pulse point, and was holding still. "How long does a diplomatic inquiry take?" he asked. The medical officer said it could be several weeks given the distance to Vrethali space. "And what happens to the hatchling during those weeks?" There was a pause that answered the question before any words did. "I'll file the inquiry," Orrin said. "In the meantime, I'm taking it somewhere warm." He closed the comm before the medical officer could finish her response. He sat there another minute, not moving, just letting the hatchling settle. It pressed closer to his chest. The jacket was warm. The cargo bay was cold and empty and smelled like death and metal. He stood up slowly, tucking the bundle against his arm the way you carry something you do not want to drop. The walk from Cargo Bay 7 to crew quarters on Deck 9 was about 12 minutes. Oren walked it at the pace of someone who had nowhere to be in a hurry and nothing to prove. A few crew members passed him in the corridor. One did a visible double take. Oren nodded at them and kept walking. By the time he reached his quarters, the hatchling had made one more small sound. Not afraid this time. Something different, and pressed its chin against his collarbone. On its chest, barely visible through the scales, there was a faint golden glow. Oren did not know what that meant. He set his scanner on the desk, sat on the edge of his bunk, and spent the next several minutes figuring out the warmest corner of his quarters for something the size of a large cat that had just had a very bad few days. He would look up what the glow meant later. Right now the job was just this. By the next station cycle, Oren Hale was famous. Not the kind of famous he had ever wanted or planned for, or thought about in any serious way across his entire career as a maintenance engineer. The kind of famous where people he had never spoken to looked at him in the mess hall and then looked away very quickly. The kind of famous where he opened his comm in the morning and found 43 messages, none of which were maintenance tickets. He was reading the 31st message, this one from someone in Alliance Legal with a subject line that had 3 exclamation marks, when someone knocked on his door. The hatchling, who had spent the night curled at the foot of his bunk and was now sitting on his desk looking at the wall like it had personally insulted her, turned at the sound. Her ears, small flat things pressed close to her head, lifted slightly. "It's fine," Oren told her, and opened the door. Director Lisa Oren stood in the corridor. She was the senior human officer on Station Meridian, and she had the expression of a woman who had been awake since before Oren woke up, which was saying something because he had been awake since the second hour of the night cycle reading messages from Alliance Legal. She looked past him at the hatchling on the desk. The hatchling looked back at her. "May I come in?" said Director Oren. It was not really a question. "Sure," said Oren, and stepped back. She came in, stood in the center of his small quarters, and explained the situation in the way that senior officers explained things when they were trying very hard not to raise their voice. The Vrethali hatchling was a protected being under 12 separate alliance agreements. 3 species aboard the station had formally requested that Oren surrender it before noon of the current cycle. The legal situation regarding first sustained contact with an unbonded Vrethali hatchling was complicated, ancient, and had never actually applied to a human before, primarily because humans had not been in space long enough for it to come up. "There is a clause," Director Oren said, "in the original Alliance Custodial Accords that places temporary guardianship responsibility on the individual who makes and maintains first contact with an unbonded minor being in the absence of a recognized clan representative." Oren waited. "You are, as of approximately 19 hours ago, that individual." Oren said, "Okay." Director Oren said, "Do you understand what that means?" "Roughly," said Oren. "It means she stays with me until someone from her species shows up to claim her." "It means," said Director Oren, "that you have accidentally inserted yourself into one of the most politically sensitive situations this station has seen in 6 years, because the Vrethali do not simply have clan representatives who can be called up on short notice. Their nearest clan seat is 4 weeks away at standard travel. The 3 species who want you to hand the hatchling over do not have the legal standing to claim her either, but they are furious, and 2 of them have filed formal complaints with the Alliance Council. Which means I now have to write a report explaining why one of my maintenance staff is legally the temporary guardian of a sacred Vrethali hatchling." She stopped. From the desk, the hatchling stepped off the edge, dropped to the floor with a small thump, walked across the quarters, and climbed up the side of Oren's chair. Then she climbed up Oren's arm. Then she settled herself across his shoulders with her chin resting on the top of his head and closed her eyes. Director Oren watched this. Oren sat very still. "Will she survive?" he said. "If I give her to someone else right now?" Director Oren did not answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. She had clearly done some reading since this morning. Vrethali hatchlings in the first week after a clutch death have a very poor survival rate without a warmth bond. They require consistent physical contact with a bonded caregiver. Without it, then I'm not giving her to someone else right now, Oren said. Director Oren looked at the hatchling on his head. The hatchling had begun to make a low, steady sound. Not quite a rumble. Something between that and a hum. "Fine," said Director Oren. I'll grant temporary custodianship under the clause and start the contact process with the Vrethali home clans. You'll need to bring her to any formal meetings. You'll need to log everything. You'll need to not do anything else that causes an interstellar incident. I'll do my best, said Orin. Your best, said Director Orin, got us here. She left. Orin sat for a moment. The hatchling shifted on his head, resettled, and the low hum continued. It was, he realized, actually quite pleasant, like having a small warm engine running very close to your ear. He reached up slowly and scratched, very gently, just behind where her ear probably was. The hum got louder. He picked up his work schedule. He had 17 maintenance tickets, and now also a dragon. He started reading the first ticket. The hatchling stayed where she was. Down the corridor, he knew, there were alien crew members who thought he had done something terrible or stupid or both. There was a Cathav officer named Dern who had apparently filed a personal request to avoid all shared spaces with Orin for the foreseeable future. There was a Nalori commander named Rail who had sent Director Orin a 3-page formal letter of protest. Orin made a note to fix the coolant leak in Deck 11 by end of cycle. The hatchling breathed steadily on top of his head. He did not have a name for her yet. He had not thought about it. But the glow on her chest, soft gold, barely visible unless the light caught it right, pulsed once, slowly, like a small heartbeat made of light. He had looked that up last night, when she was asleep. He had found one line in an old Alliance xenobiology archive, Vrethali warmth bond, early-stage bioluminescent response indicating sustained emotional attachment to a caregiver. He had read it twice. Then he had closed the archive and gone to sleep. One problem at a time. On the third day, Orin tried leaving her in his quarters. He had a repair job in a narrow-access shaft on Deck 4, the kind of tight, awkward space that was hard enough to move through without also managing a small dragon. He had set up a warm corner with a folded thermal blanket, a bowl of the nutrient paste the medical bay had reluctantly formulated after he asked them nicely twice, and then stopped asking nicely, and a chew toy he had improvised from a decommissioned rubber pipe seal. He had checked the lock on his door. Twice. He had also checked the vent covers, which was something he had never needed to do before in his life. He was 40 minutes into the Deck 4 job when his comm buzzed. Engineering, this is Deck 9 security. The thing in your quarters got out. Orin set down his wrench. How? The vent cover on the east wall. We're not sure how she got the screws off. Orin thought about this. He was the maintenance engineer on this station. He knew exactly where every vent cover led and exactly how hard the screws were to remove. Is she okay? She's fine. She's currently in Corridor 9C. She's following the environmental sensor trail on the ceiling toward Deck 4. Orin picked up his wrench. I'll be right there. He met her in the corridor about halfway. She was moving fast on 4 legs, nose low to the ground, following something. She saw him and stopped. The glow in her chest pulsed twice. Then she walked up to him, sat down on his boot, and looked up at him with the particular expression of a creature that had just been proven completely right about something. You can't keep doing this, Orin told her. She blinked. He picked her up and carried her to Deck 4. She watched him work for the rest of the shift, sitting on his tool bag with her tail wrapped around her feet, head turning slowly when he moved. He tried putting her down in 2 separate locations. She returned to the tool bag both times. After the second time he stopped trying. He named her Soln that evening. He had found the word in a Vrethali language archive, an old one, barely translated, that used the phrase to describe the first light of warmth after a cold night. It seemed right. He told her the name quietly while she was eating. She looked up at him with paste on her chin and her ears lifted, and though he was not the kind of man to read too much into things, he was fairly sure she understood. The pattern established itself over the following week with the stubborn consistency of a physical law. He went to Deck 11 for a coolant seal replacement. Solon rode in the wide outer pocket of his work bag, head out, watching the corridor pass. 2 Cathav crew members pressed themselves against the opposite wall. Orin nodded at them and kept walking. He attended a mandatory safety briefing in the main conference room on Deck 6. Solon sat in his lap. She spread herself across his datapad 14 minutes in and began pressing keys with one forepaw in a slow, exploratory way. The briefing officer, a human named Devon, lost his place in the presentation 3 times because he kept looking at her. Orin moved her paw. She moved it back. He let her. He ate in the crew mess. Solon sat on the table beside his tray and watched each bite he took with focused, scientific interest. He gave her a small piece of something the nutrient formulation said was acceptable. She ate it in one motion and then stared at his tray. He gave her another piece. 2 human crew members at the next table had stopped eating to watch. 3 alien crew members had moved their trays to the far end of the room. He did a night cycle repair on a power coupling in Deck 2. Solon fell asleep on his boots at Hour 2. He worked around her without thinking about it. When he needed to move, he shifted carefully, found her a warm spot near the coupling housing, and kept working. She slept through the rest of the job. It was Whis who finally explained it properly. Whis was a Pelari scientist on the station research team. 4-armed, quiet, the kind of alien who carried a data recorder everywhere and had been observing Orin and Solon from a respectable distance for several days. He appeared at Orin's workstation on Deck 3 one afternoon, recorder in hand, and asked if Orin had a moment. Orin, who was eating a ration bar and letting Solon investigate his scanner, said sure. Whis pulled up a diagram on his recorder. He explained what the gold glow in Solon's chest was, precisely. He used several scientific terms and then, apparently noticing Orin's expression, translated them. It was a warmth bond. The Vrethali version of deep and permanent attachment. It was, Whis said carefully, irreversible once established. Orin looked at Solon. Solon had gotten the scanner open somehow and was peering into its internal components with great satisfaction. She'll be okay, though, he said. Health-wise. She is thriving, Whis said. He checked his recorder. Her bioluminescence is developing ahead of the projected rate for her age. Her growth metrics are strong. She is, by every measure, a healthy hatchling. Good, said Orin. You understand what the bond means, Whis said, for your own situation. Culturally speaking. Orin said he had a general idea, but would not mind hearing it clearly. Whis said that in Vrethali tradition, the bonded anchor of a hatchling was considered the hatchling's first kin. The closest human translation was family. Not caretaker. Not custodian. Family. Solon had gotten the scanner fully open. She looked up from its insides, looked at Orin, and then rested her chin on the edge of the casing with an air of complete contentment. Orin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, right. That evening he walked back to his quarters on Deck 9. Solon rode on his left shoulder, tail loosely looped around his neck, watching the corridor with half-closed eyes. The glow in her chest was steady and warm. It lit the underside of his jaw faintly gold when he tilted his head. Commander Rail was in the corridor. He stood very still as Orin passed, and his expression, unreadable to most humans, had something in it that was not quite anger and not quite anything else either. Orin nodded at him out of basic courtesy. Rail said nothing. Solon did not look at him at all. The message from the Vrethali High clans arrived on a Tuesday, which was not a concept the Vrethali recognized, but which felt appropriate anyway. Director Orin called Orin to her office and read it to him. It was formal, long, and addressed to the station authority rather than to Orin directly. It acknowledged the bond. It confirmed Solon's identity as a hatchling of the Keshri bloodline, one of the 7 elder clans. It expressed gratitude for the survival of the hatchling. And it requested, in language that was polite but left very little room for interpretation, that Solon be transported to the Vrethali homeworld for proper clan upbringing at the earliest opportunity. Orin was referred to throughout the message as the human custodian. He sat across from Director Orin's desk with Solon in his lap, listening. When it was done, he said, "What does Solon get a say in?" Director Orin looked at him. "She's a hatchling. She's the one it affects." Solon, for her part, was chewing on the corner of a report that had been sitting on the edge of the desk. Director Orin retrieved it without comment. The message was only the beginning. Within 2 days, Station Meridian's diplomatic channel was generating more traffic than it had in 3 years. The Cathav sent a formal statement calling the warmth bond a spiritual contamination of a sacred bloodline. The Nalori, through Commander Rail's office, filed a complaint arguing that human interference in Vrethali succession was a structural insult to the Alliance. 2 other species weighed in with opinions nobody had asked for. The Alliance Council requested a preliminary hearing on station. Orin found out about the hearing from Whis, who appeared at his workstation again, recorder in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable. You are being asked to speak, Whis said. Before the panel. To explain your actions. Oren said he would be there. The hearing was held in the main conference room. 6 panel members, 4 of them alien, 2 human. Director Oren sat to one side. Whis sat further back, recorder running. Rail stood near the door with the stillness of someone who had decided not to say anything and was working very hard at it. Oren sat in the chair in the center of the room. Solon sat in his lap, which was not ideal for the formality of the occasion, but there was nowhere else to put her. The lead panelist, a Nalori representative named Oshen, asked Oren to describe his actions from the beginning. Oren described them. All of it. The maintenance ticket. The cargo bay. The dead Vrethali. The crate. The hatchling shaking in the corner. He described picking her up and wrapping her in his jacket. He described calling the medical bay and being told to leave her. He described not leaving her. Oshen listened. Then he asked what Oren had hoped to gain. Oren said he had not hoped to gain anything. He had hoped the hatchling would stop shaking. There was a silence in the room. Oshen said that was not an answer to the question and asked again what political or strategic interest Oren had been pursuing. Oren said he had not been pursuing one. He found a small, frightened animal alone in a cold cargo bay, and he picked it up. That was the whole of it. The panel members looked at each other. They did not look at each other the way humans look at each other when they agree. They looked at each other the way people look at each other when something does not make sense, and they are trying to figure out which part they are missing. Oshen said, "You were aware of the political significance of the Vrethali bloodline." Oren said no. He had looked it up afterward. "You were aware of the legal implications of first contact with an unbonded hatchling." Oren said no. He had also looked that up afterward. "Then what," said Oshen, "were you aware of?" Oren thought about it. That she was cold and afraid, and the only other living thing in that cargo bay was dead. Nobody said anything. Then the room changed. It was not a dramatic thing. No one moved. But Soln, who had been sitting quietly in Oren's lap, stood up on her 4 legs, turned to face the panel, and spread her wings. They were still small, not the great span they would eventually become, but they were spread fully, filling the space around her, and her chest burned gold. Not the soft glow of daily life, but bright, radiating light that reached the walls of the conference room and touched every face in it. She held it for 10 full seconds. Then she folded her wings, turned around, and pressed herself flat against Oren's chest with her chin on his collarbone. On the wall screen at the far end of the room, the holographic presence of a Vrethali representative, a delegate from the high clans, attending remotely, had gone completely still. She was large, ancient, her scales the deep color of something that had lived a very long time. She had not spoken once during the hearing. She spoke now. "Adjourn," she said, in standard language. Directly. Oshen adjourned the hearing without a word. The elder delegate's hologram requested a private conversation with Oren. He was shown to a side room, a chair, a small table, the hologram on a portable projector, the Vrethali elder filling the image with quiet authority. Oren sat down. Solon sat on the table between the projector and Oren and looked from one to the other. The elder's name was Selene. She looked at Solon for a long moment. Then she looked at Oren. "She chose correctly," Selene said. Her standard language was careful and precise. "You did not know what she was. You did not know what it would cost you. You helped her because she was small and cold and afraid." Oren said nothing. Selene looked at Solon again. "Our hatchlings," she said, "are rarely so wise." The glow in Solon's chest pulsed once, very bright, and then settled back to its steady warmth. Outside the side room, through the wall Oren could not see, Whis wrote 2 words at the top of a blank page in his research log and underlined them both. Matriarch Selene did not demand Solon's return. The message came 2 days after the private conversation, not through the formal diplomatic channel this time. Directly to Director Oren's office, with a secondary address to Oren. It was shorter than the first message and very precise. Selene requested that Oren continue as Solon's first kin for as long as Solon herself maintained the warmth bond, which could, she noted, be decades. In return, Oren's name would be entered into the Vrethali kinship records. Permanently. Director Oren read it 3 times before calling him. When he arrived at her office, she slid the message across the desk without saying anything and watched him read it. He read it twice. Then he said, "Okay." Oren said, "Okay." "Yeah," said Oren. "Okay. What else would I do?" She looked at him for a moment. Most people would want to negotiate something. Something in exchange. Status, access, a formal title. Oren looked at Solon, who was on the desk turning a data card over in her forepaws. She's already here, he said. It's not a hardship. Oren let out a long breath. The political fallout from that message hit before you woke up this morning. 7 species have requested emergency diplomatic briefings with the Alliance Council. The Cathav are calling it a humiliation. The Nalori are, she paused, also calling it a humiliation. 2 Xeno academic institutions have already sent requests for interviews with you. Oren said he would think about the interviews. Wis published his observation notes the following week. Not to the academic channel first, to Director Oren, as a formal report. Oren was called in to read it. He sat in her office again with Solon on his shoulder and read 12 pages of careful, detailed Palari scientific analysis about himself. It was strange reading. Wis had documented everything. The cargo bay. The first night. The refusal to leave her in quarters. Every corridor walk. Every repair shift. The mess hall. The way Oren moved around Solon when she was asleep on his boots rather than disturbing her. The way he talked to her quietly when he thought no one was nearby. The way his hands were always steady when he picked her up. Wis's conclusion, written in the flat language of scientific reporting, said this. In 40 years of field observation across 17 species, the subject had not previously recorded instinctive caregiving behavior performed without awareness of the caregiver's own status gain. The human acted to relieve suffering in a small creature. He did not calculate the cost. He did not seek recognition. He was not aware the creature was sacred. He helped because it needed help. Oren put the report down. You're going to need to talk to him, Director Oren said. He could have just asked me, said Oren. He did not think you would behave the same way if observed directly. Oren thought about that. He was probably right. That night he sat on his bunk and wrote a message home to his family on Earth. He tried 3 drafts. The first was too long. The second made it sound stranger than it was. The third one he actually sent. It said, I found a baby dragon in a cargo bay a few weeks ago. She's fine now. She follows me everywhere. Things got a little complicated. I'm okay. Tell Mom not to worry. He sent it and turned off the light and lay down. Solon was already asleep at the foot of the bunk, glowing faintly in the dark, and the room was the particular kind of quiet that only exists when something warm is breathing nearby. He was 3 hours into sleep when his door was hit hard from outside. Not a knock. An impact. The sound of something heavy against the frame. Then voices, low and fast, in the lorry. Oren was on his feet before he was fully awake. Old instinct. He had grown up near docks and machinery, and you learned to wake fast, or you got hurt. Solon was already standing. She was at the foot of the bunk, her legs planted, wings out. She was not large. She was still, by any measure, a young creature. But she was standing in the direction of the door, and the glow in her chest was not the soft, warm gold of daily life. It was bright. Too bright. Getting brighter by the second. The door came open. Not forced. Someone had overridden the lock. Fernalori entered. They wore no station security markings. They had the look of crew members who had decided station authority was not the authority they were following tonight. The one in front said something in Nalori that Oren's translator caught as rescue and sacred line and necessary. Solon spread her wings to their full span. Every light in the room went out. What replaced it was not darkness. It was the opposite. Gold light, brilliant and absolute, pouring from Solon's chest outward in every direction, filling the room, filling the corridor beyond the open door, bouncing off walls in waves. Not fire, not heat, something older. The bioluminescence of a Vrethali who had decided, completely and without hesitation, that this was the moment. Oren threw his arm up to cover his eyes. He heard nothing from the Fornalori. No voices. No movement. The light held for what felt like a long time. Then it dimmed, slowly, like a sun setting very fast. When Oren uncovered his eyes, the room was back to normal light levels. Solon was standing in the doorway on 4 legs, wings still spread, looking into the corridor. The glow in her chest was still running high, pulsing in slow, steady beats. In the corridor, the 4 Nalori were sitting on the floor. Not injured, not unconscious. Sitting perfectly still, eyes open, with the expressions of people who had just seen something that had rearranged something important inside them. Oren picked Solon up. She was trembling very slightly, not from fear, but from the same feeling a person gets after they have run very hard and suddenly stopped. He said quietly, "Easy. It's okay now." She folded her wings. The glow dropped to its normal warmth. She pressed her nose to his jaw and breathed out. Station security arrived 2 minutes later. They found Oren standing in his doorway in sleep clothes, holding a faintly glowing dragon. The 4 Nalori in the corridor were still sitting and showed no interest in moving. Commander Rail arrived 40 seconds after security and stood in the corridor and looked at Oren and looked at Soln. Then he bowed. It was a short bow, stiff, the kind that costs a proud person something real to give. The Nalori gesture for someone who has earned their place. Oren nodded back. "Can someone file the incident report?" he said. "I have a shift at 6th hour." Observation Deck 12 was not the nicest deck on Station Meridian. It had no scheduled use, no formal designation, and the viewport was slightly scratched from a docking incident 3 years before Oren arrived. The seating was a long fixed bench bolted to the wall that had the comfort level of something designed by someone who had never sat on anything. The lighting flickered sometimes. No one came here for the ambience. Oren came here because it had the best view of the gas giant below, and because no one else used it, and because it was the one place on the entire station where he could eat a ration bar in peace without someone either filing a formal diplomatic complaint or wanting to interview him. He was reading maintenance updates on a datapad. Solon was draped across his shoulders, wings half spread in the comfortable, lazy way she had started doing in the past week, using him as a very large perch. Her chin was on top of his head. The gas giant below them moved in slow planetary time, its cloud bands shifting in shades of amber and blue. Things had changed on the station, and also had not changed at all. Solon was larger. Not dramatically. She would not be dramatic about it for years, probably, given the lifespan of her species, but noticeably. Her wings, when spread, reached past his shoulders on both sides now. Her scales had hardened slightly, taking on the deep, lustrous quality of something becoming what it was always going to be. Her bioluminescence had developed patterns, complex ones. Wyss had published a separate paper just on the patterns. Wyss had published 3 papers in the last month. Oren had read all of them. The third one had gone to 37 academic institutions across the Alliance and had, according to Director Oren's last briefing, become the most downloaded xenosociology paper of the current academic cycle. Oren had learned this while eating breakfast and had not said anything because he did not know what there was to say. Representatives from several species had requested extended residency on the station specifically to observe him. He found this extremely strange and said so to Director Oren, who told him to be gracious about it. He was trying. The formal kinship ceremony had been held 6 days ago. Small. Private. 3 elder Vrethali delegates, Director Oren, Wyss, and Oren in a quiet room on Deck 5. Solon had sat completely still through the whole thing, which was the most unusual thing she had done in weeks. The ceremony involved formal words in Vrethali that Oren understood only in pieces, a recorded entry into the High Clan's living record, his full name, spoken aloud in the way names rarely were in interstellar settings, and a mark pressed to the inside of his left wrist. Bioluminescent Vrethali ink. Gold. The same mark that ran along the ridge of Solon's left foreleg. It would fade over years. For now it caught the light when he moved his hand and glowed for a moment before going still again. He had looked at it that night for a long time. Then he had gone to sleep, because he had a repair shift at 6th hour, and the mark was still going to be there in the morning. The real change on the station was harder to point to. It was in the way certain crew members had started looking at him differently. Not the alien crew members who had been afraid of Solon, or the ones who had filed formal complaints, or the ones who had overridden his door lock in the night cycle, though some of those had changed too. Dern, the Cathav officer who had refused to share corridors with them for weeks, had stopped rerouting. He did not approach, but he no longer left. That was something. Commander Rail had put in for reassignment 3 days after the incident. He was being transferred to a Vrethali border station at his own request. Before he left, he found Oren in Corridor 9 doing a junction repair. He stood there for a moment without saying anything. Then he looked at Solon on Oren's shoulder and said, "She is well bonded." For words, the highest compliment Nalori culture had for a guardian of something precious. Then he left. Oren had not known that at the time. Whis had explained it afterward. Orin thought about it occasionally. The alliance was not restructured. Humanity did not gain sudden political standing. There was no dramatic shift in galactic power because a maintenance engineer had picked up a cold hatchling in a cargo bay. Things did not work that way, and Orin would have been suspicious if they had. But in the reports crossing Director Orin's desk, in the academic papers and diplomatic briefings and quiet station observations, something was happening. Species that had classified humanity as minor, new, emotional, not yet serious, were going back to their assessments and adding question marks. Not because of what Orin had done, because of what he had not done. He had not calculated. He had not positioned. He had not known what the hatchling was worth and had helped her anyway. Wiss's third paper ended with a note outside normal academic form. Just a sentence, added at the end after the formal conclusion. Orin had read it standing in the corridor outside Wiss's lab where he had gone to return a borrowed tool, and Wiss had flagged the page on the datapad without looking up. The sentence said, "The human did not know the hatchling was sacred. He only knew she was cold." On observation deck 12, the gas giant turned below. Solon shifted on his shoulders, tucked her chin more firmly over the top of his head, and let out a long, slow breath. The glow in her chest was steady. It lit the air around them faintly gold. The scratch on the viewport caught the light and scattered it in a small, imperfect starburst pattern across the floor. Orin finished his ration bar. He had 4 more tickets to read before the end of cycle. A pressure sensor on deck 2. A coolant coupling on deck 7. A light fitting that had been flickering for 3 weeks on deck 9 that he kept forgetting to put in for parts. He heard footsteps at the entrance to the deck. He did not look up. Wiss was there, recorder in hand, in his quiet way that managed to be present without being intrusive. He stood for a moment, watching them. The gas giant. The scratch viewport. Orin on the bench with the bioluminescent dragon spread across his shoulders like something ancient and impossible and completely at ease. Then Wiss left without saying anything, and Orin went back to his maintenance tickets. Solon shifted one wing, draped it slowly around the side of his head, and breathed. He reached up and scratched behind her ear without looking. She glowed. Some things, once they settled into place, did not need explaining. They just were. A hatchling in a cargo bay. A man who picked her up. A station full of species slowly learning what it looked like when someone helped something small for no reason except that it needed help. The gas giant turned. The mark on his wrist caught the light. He put in the parts request for the Deck 9 light fitting and closed the datapad.